I'm Jordan.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is the Inside Music City podcast.
Welcome to another episode of Inside Music City, where it's our job to talk to music industry professionals about the ins and outs of the music business.
This episode was brought to you by our wonderful patrons. If you want to find out how you can become part of the Patreon family, as well as getting some behind-the-scenes content, visit us at patreon.com/Inside Music City. Today's episode is with music attorney Barry Shrum. He's been a practicing attorney for over 20 years now, is a published author, and the students at Belmont University are lucky enough to have him as an adjunct professor. His books include Counting Stars and Origins of an Idea. And he has two blogs. One is called Law on the Row, which deals with legal issues in the music industry, and Songwriter's Corner, which is tailored towards the essentials that songwriters need. We touch on all of these during the interview. We also talk about his unconventional road to becoming an attorney and one of the biggest legal mistakes musicians can make. I hope you enjoy this conversation with entertainment lawyer, Mr. Barry Shrum. Barry, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Glad you can make it out here. For our listeners that might not know you, can you give a little bit of your legal background?
I can. You can find out a lot of it at www.barryshrum.com. Spell Shrum, S-H-R-U-M, by the way. But basically, I've been practicing entertainment law, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. And, entertainment law gets a lot of misunderstood looks. It can include intellectual property, it can include other things as well, corporate law, transactional contracts, things of that nature, and of course litigation. But summing it all up, I've been doing that for about 25 years. I've been practicing entertainment law. I started in Philadelphia, started a little practice with a friend of mine. We had just been laid off from a large firm, and so we started Art and Entertainment Law Group, not having a clue where it would lead us. 25 years later, I'm now in Nashville. That was Philadelphia. And now it's Shrum and Associates, but I'm still doing much of the same things I was doing back then.
It's amazing. You got a long history of it. So what made you want to get started in law, and especially entertainment law?
To make the long story a little bit shorter, I think when I was about 5 years old, my brothers were always into music, particularly my brother Kim. Kim started playing guitar when I was about 5 years old. That would have been about 1965. And I remember it clearly. He and Mike got together with this Methodist kid, the son of the Methodist preacher down the street, and he had a wah-wah pedal. And so that was very exciting to all of us back then. It was pre-digital. So they started a band. Of course, since I was only 5, my brothers, being a bit older, had no interest in me being part of it, at least at that time. So a few years had to pass before eventually I became the drummer of the band. And so that leads to my interest in music. Now, it took a few turns between here and there, but about a decade later, they decided they wanted to start a publishing company. At the time, I was in theology school. That's one of those turns. And so they called and said, we want to do this. We want to start a publishing company. We're interested in this little guy who plays guitar, writes songs, and we want to sign him to the publishing company and make an album. So I had no idea what to do, but I said, well, I'll figure it out. And I did. So I bought every book I could on entertainment law, copyright law, music publishing. And I started figuring out how to set up corporations, set up LLCs, that kind of thing. And I set them up a corporation and drafted the agreement with the young gentleman. And that got me interested. That whet my appetite for law and structure and things of that nature.
Did you then immediately decide to go to law school after that?
No, it took a while. I had moved to Philadelphia. One of the teachers, I went to school at David Lipscomb here in Nashville and studied speech communication, which is a good precursor for law, but I had no intent or desire at that point to be a lawyer. So I thought I wanted to be a theologian and teach that in college and write books. So I moved north to go to Westminster Theological Seminary in Glenside, Pennsylvania, and that's what took me to the Northeast. When I did that, I sold my drums, I sold everything related to music, and thought I was just going on a different path. So when I got into theology school, I started teaching at a local community college, and then the call came from the brothers to say, you know, we want you to do this. And I was getting to be about 30 years old at that point, and my father had always told me, you know, you ought to be a lawyer. He was mainly telling me that because I probably smarted off to him one too many times, but or talked back to him, you know, argued with him, whatever. But I started thinking about it, and I started thinking about what I was making as a teacher at a small community college. Started thinking about my student loans, and you know, the two just didn't balance quite well. So I decided to look into law school, and I happened to be dating a girl in Delaware at the time, and I was driving by Widener, or it was called Delaware Law School at the time. I was driving by that every day, going to see her. So one day I just pulled the car in, stopped, and found a cute little co-ed there, and asked her how I got started into law school, and she explained, and I went and took the LSAT, and the rest is history.
So being an attorney in Nashville, what percentage of your clientele are musicians?
When I started, it would probably be 100%. Would have been Nashville-based music industry people, musicians, artists. As Napster came along and digital music came along and the industry did what it did, and we all know that path, my music clientele started to diminish. So I had to start looking into other areas of entertainment.
What other areas do you work with?
Well, as you guys probably know, I represent Damon John on the Shark Tank, for example. He would be an example of the direction I went. After music started to suffer, I started looking elsewhere. And Damon is one of those clients, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, that I found at that point. And his business is still based in intellectual property generally, because it still involves trademark, still involves copyright and all those things. But it's more focused on branding and licensing. So that's kind of the direction my clientele took. Once I had Damon, started working with a licensing company out of Florida that represented Flowrida, and started doing a lot of those licensing deals for that team. And that's sort of what brought me to where I am right now. So I've got more of a cross-section of industries now.
Really wide variety, it sounds like.
Yeah, and it tended to move into the entrepreneur kind of startup kind of area, where you know you might have an investor who's interested in investing in a particular person's idea or technology, and you know, I would work out the terms of those kinds of deals. All still based in the same kind of things, music. I mean, when you're talking about music, you're talking about a grant of license as well, but definitely a different and broader focus.
Do you think that it's a wise idea for musicians to think of themselves as entrepreneurs?
I do. I think it, particularly in today's environment and culture, I think thinking of yourself more as a business, as a brand, as an entrepreneur is probably a wise move.
What are some aspects on the legal side of the business that people need to start
And I think we
about?
had a question like that, didn't we?
You have it there.
Is that Andrew Gomez?
It might have been Andrews.
Yeah, what is the best legal advice that you can give to new and up-and-coming artists?
Yeah, what kind of areas might an artist focus on, which is I think what you're asking. So, and that's not an easy question because of what's happened in the music industry. You know, we came from a market idea of selling product and distributing product, manufacturing a record, getting that record played on radio, and then driving the consumer to the stores. That's an old market now. You know, now the market's different. You've got to get your product on the internet. Well, that's all well and good, and it's easy to do. As most artists or musicians will tell you, you can put it up there all day long. Question is, how are you going to drive the market to it? So, in some ways, our current culture is easier because everybody has access to distribution. But in other ways, it's harder because now there's not a good way to market yourself except through social media and YouTube and those kinds of things where, you're a needle in a haystack. So what would I tell an artist to focus on? Probably that kind of thing. Know how to work the system, the internet system. Know how to market yourself on the internet through social media. Develop a following. And in that way, it's no different than it was back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You've got to find people who want to listen to your music, whether that be through Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, whatever. You've got to build that following so that when you do get out there, when you do go tour, you can put the word out to your street team, as it were, and get them to come listen to your show. I guess that would be where I would tell an artist to focus. But it's more than that. I mean, you've got to know everything about the business, and the history of the business helps too. It's, researching copyright, researching intellectual property, trademark, all that is involved in branding, all that is involved in marketing, and having an astute awareness of what's going on there will help, because I think in a lot of ways, because of where we are, people have gotten away from the basics of copyright and intellectual property. So I think a strong grounding in that would help too. Then of course there's always the music.
What are some of the dangers of not paying attention to copyright and IP?
Well, I can look at that a number of different ways. Philosophically, I think a lot of people have moved away from the idea of owning the fruits of your intellectual labor. When I write a song, why is that mine? The founders of our country dealt with that when they drafted the Constitution. They dealt with that amongst themselves, and they figured out that you've got to give the creator an incentive to share the idea. Otherwise, the instinct is to keep it to yourself, because that's the only way you can truly own an idea, is to keep it in your head and not share it with anybody. But when we were starting up America and we wanted people to share their ideas so that we would be culturally diverse like Europe, we had to find a way to encourage that. And we established a monopoly to benefit society by giving out those ideas so that people would freely use them. It's an important cornerstone of copyright, and understanding that philosophically is one of the things I see missing from a lot of the kids that I teach at Belmont. I didn't mention that I teach adjunct entertainment law and licensing over at Belmont. So a lot of the kids that come through, you see it, we talk to them, you know that they don't really understand why we have copyright, why we have trademark. Why is that important?
For those that might not know these terms, can you define copyright
Sure.
and trademark?
Well, there's three government-backed, I guess, intellectual properties, and that would be copyright, trademark, and patent. Of course, patent doesn't involve the music industry as much as the other two, but sometimes, I've had drummers who invented special devices to go on their drums, so sometimes you might be involved in a patent. A patent is the most novel of an idea that can be protected. And with the patent, you have to file that with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. You have to file certain claims. They will challenge those claims. You have to show what you might have used, what prior art might have been involved in that patent. And then you only get a patent for 17 or 20 years, depending on what it is. Then we move to trademark. Now, trademark is sort of a little different than patent and a little different than copyright in that a trademark is just what it sounds like. It is a mark or a logo that is used in trade. You can also have a service mark, but still trade. So when you think of trademark, think of McDonald's and Burger King. Those are two logos, both used for the same product, burgers. But what a trademark does is identifies and distinguishes between those two sources. When you're driving down the street and you're interested in a burger that tastes like it was cooked outdoors, you're going to be looking for that big flame-looking Burger King logo. If you don't really care about that, or you prefer a fried patty, then you're going to be looking for the big golden arches. So it helps identify and distinguish those two products. And then copyright. Copyright originated as just that, the right to copy a book, originally. And that right, back up a second, the trademark you can have for 10-year periods as long as you keep renewing it, and that's infinitely. So as long as you're using that trademark, or as long as the business is using that trademark, that belongs to that business for so long as they just keep using it. Now, back to the copyright. Copyright lasts for life plus 70 years. Now, there are a lot of people that'll say, well, that's unconstitutional because it's unlimited. The Supreme Court says no. In one case, the Supreme Court ruled on, they said no, life plus 70 is a limit. It might not be as limited as you want, but that's what the Constitution says. So our copyright derives, and our patents, and our trademark from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the Constitution, which says that Congress has the right to provide for a limited time to artists and creators the exclusive right to those inventions and writings, simply put. So that's what a copyright is.
How does it relate to a songwriter, and then how does that songwriter?
Yeah, stepping off my ivory tower, I would say easily enough, go to copyright.gov. If you're a musician, you have a song, you want to copyright it, set up an account, log in, and register your copyrights. It's a lot simpler than when I was younger and you had to file the form and get the right form and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty straightforward, particularly for people in the internet age that understand computers. So that's number one. Go there. You don't have to understand a lot about it to be able to go in and register your copyright. Second thing is understand that there's a difference between the copyright in the musical composition and the copyright in the sound recording. Those are two separate copyrights in most circumstances. So if you have just a song that you've written, you can sing it on an MP, sing it into a phone and put it into an MP3 format, file that as words and music, and that's your registration. I think the fee is $50, and that's it. You'll have the registration for the copyright. If it's a sound recording that you want to copyright, if you're going to release that MP3 to the world as a sound recording and sell it on iTunes and put it on YouTube and that kind of thing, then you probably want to do the sound recording separately and copyright that as the sound recording. If you are the owner of all of those, the words, the music, and the sound recording, you can do it all on an SR form or the SR under the sound recording copyright.
When should people look at getting their stuff copyrighted?
That's a very good question because a lot of people wait too late. I'm involved in a case right now where a songwriter is alleging he co-wrote something back in the 90s, but he doesn't have a certificate. He didn't register it with the U.S. Copyright Office, doesn't have a certificate of registration. Why would I need that, somebody might ask. Well, if you want to bring a copyright infringement action in federal court, which is the only place you can bring it, you have to have a registration certificate. That's one reason it's very important. Another is if you want to get what we call statutory damages, damages that are prescribed by law, you have to have a registration certificate. And those damages, depending on whether the copyright infringement is willful or not willful, not intentional, innocent as it were, can range from $200 all the way up to $150,000 if it's willful per work infringed. So that's pretty significant. So if I'm a songwriter and I want to protect, I want to put my stuff out there, I want people to listen to it, I want people to buy it, I want people to hear it, then if I want to protect it, if I want to take advantage of what Congress gives us, then I've got to register it.
Is there an example of a songwriter that did not protect their music and someone else took it and made it big?
Well, there are multiple examples. I mean, there have been cases, the case I just mentioned that I'm actually involved in was a young, well, not so young, he's a 30-year-old artist that lives out in middle of Tennessee. He put out an album with a small little independent label. They played him a few songs. He picked a few, went on to sell some product and get some t-shirts made up and all that kind of stuff. And then a few years later, this guy sues him and says, that song that you picked is my song. So here's an artist who's a defendant now in a federal lawsuit, and he's being sued by someone who didn't register their works. So he would have had no way of knowing it, first of all. So yeah, I mean, it happens all the time.
We're going to do another listener question.
Okay.
And this one is, what is the biggest mistake that you see artists make when it comes to the legal side of business?
I would have to say that the biggest mistake an aspiring artist can make is to sign a document, any kind of document involving your music career, without having someone of expertise look at it. If I had my way, it would be an entertainment attorney, of course, and I would recommend that. Even if you don't use me, go find yourself an entertainment attorney, even if it's the uncle of, your uncle's brother, or your uncle's brother would be your father. Even if it's
Or your other uncle.
or your other uncle. Even if it's a distant relative is the point. I mean, find yourself somebody who knows about copyright and these kinds of things, because sometimes I'll get and I can't tell you the number of times I've had people come in the door and put a contract on my desk and say, "Can you get me out of this? What can I do about this?" And I look to the signature page. If they've signed it, I say, "Nothing. You signed it." A court of law is going to do the exact same thing. The court's going to look at it and say, "Well, did you sign it?" "Yeah." "Did you read it?" "No." "Okay, I don't care. If you signed it, you're an adult, you know better." So that's probably the biggest mistake they can make. And don't go to your uncle, the real estate attorney, to have your publishing contract looked at. Doesn't work. I mean, there are differences in contracts, and a real estate lawyer is not used to seeing the kind of things I am, or a trained entertainment attorney is. So that would be the biggest mistake.
For anyone really, if they come and knock on your door, do you charge them like an hour fee, or is it like a pro bono thing? Or
Well, I don't do a lot of pro bono work, just for people who come in the door.
Right.
Let's start there. And generally, for the last few years, I haven't done any free consultations. I've pretty much had a policy of paid consultations. Mm-hmm. Having said that, the old idea of an hourly rate is sort of passé. I mean, when I'm litigating a case, yeah, I'll have to have an hourly rate, because the litigation involves a lot of time, a lot of my time, and a lot of resources. And the only way to charge for that is through a billable hour. Mm-hmm. So on something like that, my hourly rate's going to, well, I don't even want to tell you what my hourly rate would be.
But it'll be by the hour.
Yeah, but it is high, because it's litigation.
Right.
And it impacts my malpractice insurance. It just, all kinds of things have to be considered. Now, when I flip to the transactional side and somebody comes to me and says, "I've got a contract, I've heard that I don't need to sign anything. I listened to your show. I heard that I shouldn't sign anything without a contract. How much will you charge me to look at it and tell me what's going on?" I'm going to give them a low flat rate for that.
Okay.
And look at it and have a conversation with them and tell them, what I would look out for. If they want to scale that up a little bit and say, "Well, can you redline it for me? Can you make some edits and tell me what you would change and show me," and that kind of thing, then I'm going to scale that up a little bit. It'll still be a flat rate. Because I found years ago, particularly in the music industry, when you're dealing with musicians, songwriters, and I don't mean to be crass, but they're a poor crew. They're living from paycheck to paycheck very often, from nightclub to nightclub, maybe even tips. So a lot of them don't have a lot of money. So I understand that. Mm-hmm. And I found that charging by the hourly rate for the music industry in general is not the best business model. So I use a combination of flat rates and hourly rates. Sometimes I'll do a monthly thing with people.
It seems like you're willing to work with the people that you're working with, and make sure that they get the services that they need, while also you being what's the right word? Compensated for the work that you do. Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, when I got into this business in particular, entertainment law, I realized that I'm going to be dealing with celebrity types, whether it be musicians, whether it be artists on television, actors, whatever it is. It's a celebrity clientele. And those people have certain expectations. And when you talk about services, that to me is what I provide. And that's what I'm best at, is giving you service in exchange for the value you give me. So I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears just a little bit for right now. Where did your love for teaching come from?
I've always had a love of helping others. I think that derives from a lot of things in my life. I often acted as a mediator between my parents, for example, and I developed some skills there, but I found that I was good at it. I'm good at taking two different diverse opinions or three different diverse opinions and coming up with a reasonable, rational solution. So I discovered that fairly early in my life, and this gets back to how I got into theology, because when I was younger, I was a song leader in my church, Church of Christ out in White Oak, Tennessee. Little hole in the wall, trust me. I think my biggest attendance was maybe 200 people. On average, it was 50 to 100. But the big church in Lafayette, Tennessee, the big Lafayette Church of Christ, a couple of the kids came to me and said, "Would you be our youth minister?" And so they recognized in me something that I maybe at the time didn't even recognize in myself, and that was the ability to share things and be an instructor, be a teacher. I think that's where it comes from. It's my personality. I like helping. I like sharing what I know.
Because throughout your life, there's somewhat of a pattern of teaching, wouldn't you say? With the being the youth minister, and then after going to school for theology, you came out and were.
Some would say it's one of the common threads in all of what I've done.
Yeah.
You know.
Not only do you do the adjunct teaching at Belmont, but you also write a lot of legal articles that you put out, and they're all published where?
They're published on lawontherow.com. That's an homage to Music Row, of course, and my practice there. But you can get to them from barryshrum.com as well. There's a link to my blog there. Yeah, and that started early on in my career. I mean, even when I was a youth minister, I would put out newsletters and things. So writing has also been part of this overall instructing thing that you've picked up on, because that's what a writer does. In essence, at least the old newspapers, you were a journalist. You were sharing something that you had researched and found out. And I started that as a photojournalist and worked into the writing aspect of it. So. Yeah, and then that grew into when I started practicing law, particularly here in Nashville. I just had a desire to put out articles and things that would help songwriters in particular. My brother Kim is a songwriter, so a lot of this comes from my desire to help my brothers that I talked about earlier, but it's broader than that. So, I would put out articles that would help songwriters, and even on Law on the Row right now, you can go to Songwriters Corner, and there's a whole selection of articles that are geared towards songwriters. That just kind of evolved. It started as a newsletter, and I would send it out to a couple hundred people on Music Row. I did that for a few years, and then of course this is all when the internet was starting to take off, and I'm like, well, if I can do it for free, put it right here on the internet, then I'm going to do that. And then that grew into a book, a couple of books that I have. You can find those on Amazon as well. There's one called Origins of an Idea. That book combines kind of my love of music and copyright with my theology training, because it's kind of an apologetic. The word apologetic in theology means you're defending the faith, as it were. So I applied that to copyright and defended the whole concept of the Progress Clause and what our founding fathers had in mind for us. And so that's what Origins of an Idea is about. And then my second book is called Counting Stars. And that's about celebrity endorsements. That book grew out of what I teach at Belmont, which is it's all about licensing endorsements and things of that nature, and rights of publicity and things which we don't normally think of in the intellectual property realm, but are as much an intellectual property as anything else. All of us have a right to exploit our persona if we want to. There's about 28 states, roughly speaking, that recognize it in some form. Some states recognize it as a right of privacy or the opposite of a right of privacy. Others actually have an explicit right of publicity statute like Tennessee. And then others just use common law. That's a right that interests me a great deal because it's sort of outside the scope of legally prescribed rights that come from the Progress Clause. And it stands over here by itself as sort of an amalgam of several of the philosophies in copyright and trademark.
Can you explain right of, what was it?
Right of publicity?
Right of publicity, yes. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's that's what I was saying. It's kind of it's our personal right. And I guess the best way to do it is to start with the right of privacy. Mm-hmm. Even the right of privacy is not a constitutionally prescribed right. You have to kind of look into the Constitution, and it took Samuel Brandeis, or Louis Brandeis and Samuel Warren to write an article about it that ultimately led to the Supreme Court recognizing this right of privacy. We have a right to keep our private information private. Some would argue we've lost that in the internet age, but that's another discussion. But if you flip that around, if we have the right to keep our information private, then what if I want to exploit my information, my looks, my voice, who I am? What if I'm Marilyn Monroe or I'm somebody who wants to exploit it? Do I have that right? And some people, that's why it's called the flip side of the right of privacy, because we do have that right, and some states give us that right through law. Mm-hmm. So it's a state law, it's not a federally prescribed thing. That's what it is. And then you get into the idea, okay, if I have that right, if I have the right to exploit my persona, my voice, all that kind of stuff, does my family have that right after I die? Mm. In other words, if I pass away, and Marilyn Monroe did, Elvis did, James Dean did, and you see their estates, in many cases, making a lot of money as a result of the post-mortem right of publicity. Mm-hmm. When Prince died recently, this was a big thing because Minnesota did not have a Rights of Publicity Act, so they rushed one through and established that. So you see it playing out in every day in our culture.
Let's do another listener question.
Yeah, we had a good one that was asked, how do artists navigate the copyright laws and such of YouTube so they can make money covering songs written by and performed by other people?
That is a touchy issue, and I think we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. When YouTube first came out, of course, it was the Wild West. People were doing anything they wanted to. People would cover a song, put it up there, would get millions of hits, they would start making money on it. And eventually, the powers that be, the owners of those copyrights, whether it be the publisher or the record label owning the recording, or the people themselves, would say, that's not right. You're using my creation to exploit and make money. So something had to be done. So the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, was passed, I want to say 1996, I don't remember the exact date, but roughly the same time that YouTube and the internet all started becoming popular. And what the DMCA does is gives those copyright owners the right to send a notice to the internet service provider saying that is my intellectual property, that's my copyright or that's my trademark, whatever is being used. They can say that's mine, you have to take it down. And if Google now or YouTube back then complies, then the DMCA gives them a safe harbor so they can't be contributorily negligent for copyright infringement. So that's the tit for tat that they put into the law to give the ISP a safe harbor and give the copyright owners a way to say that's mine. Now fast forward about 10 years and YouTube eventually struck deals with most of the owners of copyrights for performance royalties, because that's essentially, or sync royalties, that's essentially what's happening when that's occurring. So they pay performance royalties to the performance rights organizations who then distribute them to the songwriters. So in that sense, a person can go up and put a cover on as long as it doesn't get extremely popular. likelihood is it's going to fly under the radar and fly under that system that they've got in place. But there's two problems with that. First of all, there's also something called a sync license. And if it's getting 15 million hits and you've used a very popular recording, then the owner of that recording might come in and say, well, they didn't pay us a sync fee, so therefore you have to take it down. And then the second thing is, publishers always have the right, and songwriters always have the right, to step outside that system of performance rights organizations and license things directly. So if they are the owner, they too can send a takedown notice and say that's mine. So you have those independents outside the structure who sometimes take it down. So how does an artist navigate it? It's not easy. I would say do your best to comply. If you get a notice from YouTube saying you violated somebody's copyright, take it down as quickly as you can, because you don't want to get in the middle of a copyright infringement action for certain. And if you don't comply with them, they'll shut it down. Now, if you think you've been wrong, because there's the example that everybody always uses, and that's the little baby dancing to the Prince thing in the background, which was not the primary point of the video. Of course, the baby was dancing. That's the primary point. That's what the court ultimately said. So, you know, that's an exception to these rules. And that's what's called fair use. And that's a provision under the Copyright Act that provides certain First Amendment rights and gives them priority. If you're using a copyrighted work for some purpose that Congress has deemed beneficial, that can be commenting on recent news events, that can be reporting on news, that can be education. There are a number of things prescribed in the Copyright Act. That's not all of them. But some of those things have been deemed to be more important than the monopoly that we're given under copyright. And that's something that our legislators and others have built into the system to make it work better.
Now, I've seen YouTube videos that have millions of views that are like covers of songs, or that are like singing with the instrumental track of another artist's song, that have millions of views, that it is monetized, so it has ads before the video, and that it's still up. Does that mean that they have like gotten permission to do so, or it just hasn't been taken down yet? Yeah,
they've probably gotten permission.
Okay.
Trust me, if that's the case, if you're making millions of, if you're getting millions of views, and Google is willing to pay you money to do that, and they will. You know, some people make six figures doing that kind of thing. Then I can guarantee you that in the background, Google or somebody has gone to the owner of that copyright and said, look, these people are getting 15 million hits. You know, we're going to be generating 500,000 in ad fees. Will you let us use it if we give you a portion of that? Chances are they will. So that's going to happen behind the scenes sometimes. Sometimes they'll come to you, you know, and when you get that takedown notice, if it's a case like this where you've got a lot of views, then you might want to pursue it and go directly to whoever publishes the song.
Yeah, and at that point you could be like, hey, I'll give you a certain percentage of the monetary value that I'm receiving from it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we want to just not even run the chance of getting that takedown notice, how can we get a sync license?
That's almost impossible for an individual to do.
Oh, is it?
Isn't there like a something Fox?
Harry Fox.
Harry Fox.
That would be for mechanical licensing.
Mechanical license.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we can talk about compulsory, but when you're talking about a sync license, that has always been negotiated on a per contract kind of basis. Somebody wanted to use your song in a movie, you get to name the price, and you got to evaluate, you know, what it's worth. How much distribution are you going to get out of it? How popular is your song already? Is it already a commodity? Then your price is going to go up. But if it's not, and they've found you on YouTube and they want to use your song, then your negotiating strength's a little bit lower and your price is going to go down. So there's a number of factors you would have to consider in a sync license. There's no easy way if I want to do a cover and I'm a musician and I want to call up whoever and say, hey, I want to use your song on YouTube. I mean, I think most everybody can guess what the answer is going to be.
Yeah.
And it's usually not going to be pretty.
So what's your favorite part of your job? If you had to pick one or two things about your job as an entertainment lawyer, what would you pick?
I think the first thing I would pick is the fact that it's diverse. I mean, there are certain constants, right? But I never know from one day to the next who my next client's going to be and what they do and how that relates to me. And that excites me. And I'm one of those few people in life that has found a job that I can truly say I enjoy, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I'll give you just one quick example of that. I mean, about 6 months ago, I get a call from a guy who wants to meet and talk. He's not a celebrity, but what he did was, back in the 80s, when they were renovating the Statue of Liberty, you know, taking out the armature bars inside and replacing those and replacing a lot of the copper and just, you know, making it more stable. He caught wind of that and he says, well, I wonder what they're doing with all that stuff they're taking out. And that's the stuff that Eiffel formed, you know, when he built the Statue of Liberty. That's historically significant. To make a long story short, he went to the National Park Service and he struck a deal and he did pulled all the stuff out for them and took it off and kept it. So now he has it, and he does a lot of different things with it. And a lot of it involves licensing, a lot of it involves intellectual properties, a lot of it involves branding. So, I mean, such a diverse interest. You wouldn't think of that for an entertainment attorney. You know, you think musician, you think songwriter, you think even maybe actor, or maybe even a sports figure, but you don't really think of a salvage person who went in and got all that stuff from the Statue of Liberty, but you should, because that can be a brand. And that's what excites me about it. It's I have a lot of different interests. I always consider myself something of a Renaissance man in that, you know, I know a lot about a lot of different things. In my job, I looked for something that would whet that appetite, whet that diversity that I needed, and entertainment law does that really well. So I think that's what I love about it most. And the second thing I like about it a lot is that when you think of lawyers, you typically don't think positively. Industry of law has a long-standing practice of protecting rights, whether it be human rights, personal rights. You know, if you've been injured, that's a right. You have a right to be compensated for that. But most people think of that in a negative sense, whereas when you come over to the creative side, and I'm protecting the rights of the creative, to me that's a more positive spin on it, and it gets back more to the tradition of law, which is to protect rights. So that's the second thing I like the most about it.
What did you do in college that has been the most beneficial for your career?
I would have to say play in a band. I mean, that's a hard one for me because, as I told you, I went, you know, when I was at Lipscomb, I was in speech communication, and I thought I wanted to be in theology. And you know, I had a great professor, a theology professor, Greek professor, and I enjoyed taking classes with him. And that's sort of, I guess, misguided me into theology where I really shouldn't have been in the first place. So I can't say that anything in my college education really helped in that regard, except to say that speech communication was broad enough that I learned some basic skills of communicating. I guess if I'd had to fall back on an answer, that would be it. I mean, if you don't know what you want to do, and let's face it, when you're in college, you're 18, 19 years old. And I have a son who's a junior in college. So I know, I mean, we have great expectations for our kids, you know, to know what they're going to do with the rest of their lives when they're 19, 20 years old. I didn't know. If you had to fall back on something general enough that can take you in a lot of different directions, because life tends to lead you down ways you'll never be able to anticipate. For me, that's the way it happened. It was just such a circuitous route from where I was in college to where I am now. It's like I'm a different person.
Because you didn't go to law school till you were 30? Is that right?
Yeah. 28, I think, was the age.
28 or so? There may be some people that want to go through a drastic career change. One might be to go to law school, but they think, oh, but I'm not, 23 years old like all the rest of these kids going in. I'm a little bit more, little older. Like, did waiting so long to shift into law, did that hold you back at all?
I guess in some ways I could nitpick and say it did. I mean, obviously the people I was competing with were younger. They went to Ivy League schools, and it was tough. And there's no way I was going to compete with the younger kids who were in law school and knew they wanted to be a lawyer from the time they were in high school. Having said that, I would say no, it didn't hinder me, because I think, and part of that had to do with the program that Delaware Law School had at the time. It's called Spring Admission. And it was a night program, and that's one of the reasons I chose it, because I had to work my way through law school, unlike a lot, and so I had to find something that was night. So there weren't many choices around the Philadelphia area at the time. There was Temple that had some weekend programs, more on the weekend than night, and then there was Delaware Law School, which was ultimately bought by Widener University, which is why I keep trying to call it that. But they had Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And the Tuesday, Thursday was from like 6 to 9, and the weekend was in the morning. I don't remember the exact time, but what that did is it catered to an older crowd. So most of the people I went to law school with, at least the first year and a half, were older people. There were some engineers in there who were going to be patent attorneys. There were just older people who wanted a change in their lives. There were a few paralegals who had decided, okay, I'm just going to take the plunge and do it. I've been working as a paralegal for 10 years. Let me do that. So it was an older crowd. That was helpful. I could see that you can decide later in life to do something like law and still be successful at it. So I would tell somebody who's thinking about that, don't let that be the factor. I mean, yeah, it's consideration. It's like I tell my students, life is what you make of it. You can sit back and you can look at the negatives and you can say, yeah, I'm young, I'm too old to go to law school, I can't compete with the young kids, I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, you can. It's just a matter of how badly do you want it. And you can make it happen. If you decide, okay, yeah, that's what I want to do, that's the first step. The rest you can figure out.
Have we touched on how you've kept up with rapid changes in the music industry?
Well, I guess indirectly we've touched on it, but not directly. I mean,
well, let's go directly then.
I've referred to the Napster age, which many call the lost decade of the music industry. And I went through this. I mean, I lived it. I was an entertainment attorney when Napster came about. And I can tell you at the time I was working with one attorney, and we were talking about MP3s one day, and you got to have a little backstory. He represented some pretty high-powered people who sold a lot of records. And I was asking him, why doesn't this particular star we were talking about, why doesn't he just go out and set up a website and start selling his own downloads? And the lawyer looked at me as serious as he could and said, yeah, those MP3s, that's a fad. 5 years from now, they won't be around. Well, the flip thing happened, right? Not only were the MP3s around, but the CDs that he was selling were no longer around, or no longer really relevant at that point. So it kind of flipped it. I lived through this, and I saw Napster come about, and I saw the sort of the culture that developed around Napster, which was, we want to stick it to the big guys, and we want our music for free. They've been ripping us off for 20, 30 years. They've been selling us albums for, $20, 10 songs on them, only one of which I want. So screw that. I'm going to go over here to Napster where I can get every song ever recorded, for the most part, and I can find it on Napster and I can download it for free. I mean, I had friends who downloaded, we didn't have terabytes back then, but gigabytes of hard drives full of music. Just downloaded it. So, having grown through that, and that's the time I said earlier that I had to kind of adapt, because if you stayed in that industry, obviously when you take away an industry's product, when you say, okay, we're going to download our music for free and millions of people are doing it, your market, the biggest part of your market, it's going to hurt. For the music industry, that hurt equaled 50% of its revenue over a 10-year period from roughly 1996 to 2006. So you look at that revenue scale and you see that dropping. Well, I was living through that as an entertainment attorney, primarily as a music attorney, as I told you. So what am I going to do? You've got to find other ways, like I talked about. You've got to think of entertainment in a broader sense and realize where music fits in that and make that your focus. When I look at how I've adapted to the changes, that's the biggest way. I mean, I've always been a geek in terms of, I was the first one on any computer device. I mean, I had a Texas Instruments 99 4A, which nobody knows what that is anymore, but it was one of the very first little wedge computers that you hooked up to your television. I think it was roughly 1990, maybe even earlier, but this thing was archaic. And I figured out a way to hook it up to my typewriter so that I could actually program my papers in and type out my papers through the computer so I didn't have to go back and correct things. That was pretty cool. That was the biggest thing I did with it. But at any rate, that helped me to see where the industry was going and adapt to it in my practice as well. Because I could see the popularity of MP3s, and I saw that it was more than just a technology. It was something that was becoming cultural. It was a revenge kind of thing. And so you have to sort of adapt your practice. And then, of course, if you're still dealing with musicians, you got to help them figure out ways around it. And that's where we get into the marketing that we talked about earlier, and the branding and ways to get your music out there that are different from the old business model that the labels operated under.
So as artists are building their team, obviously a lawyer should be part of that team. How should an individual go about looking for an attorney and deciding who to bring onto their team?
Well, timing is everything when you're talking about the team. Personally, of course, I would say that your lawyer is pretty early in that process, with the caveat that don't think of your lawyer as the one who shops your things, whatever it is, whether it's songs, whether it's you're an artist, whether you're a celebrity, whether you're an actor. Their position is not to get you noticed and get you a job or get you placed or get your song cut. Their job is to guide you through the process. They are the ones who know all the people in town. They know the PR people. They know the booking people. They know the record labels and people in the record labels. So they can help in that regard more than they can getting your stuff placed. So, and that's why I say it's a timing thing, because you do want a lawyer early on, but of course you have no money to hire a lawyer early on. So it's problematic. That's where you need to find somebody who will agree to work with you on your level, as we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. Find someone who will work with you on a flat rate. If they don't advertise that, address it with them. Say, do you ever work on a flat rate, and what is that? There's no harm in getting second opinions. Mm-hmm. So find somebody who will work with you early on as a lawyer on that basis. And if they're willing to do you that way, stick with them. Have a little loyalty. Then you need to find the creative elements, the people who can shop your material, who are not under any ethical obligations, who can go out there and promote you like you should be promoted. Who are those kind of people? That ranges from people who maybe used to be personal managers. The personal management industry changed over that lost decade I talked about, because at one point personal managers would charge you 20-25% of your gross revenues, and they can make a living doing that. As record sales decreased, as touring became more of the artist way to make money, their revenue stream started to dry up, so they had to figure out new ways to do business. A lot of those kinds of people started doing things on a flat monthly rate. I'll represent you at, for $1,000 a month. If we get you a deal, then I want 20%. So you can find creative sorts that will help you under that basis. Perhaps a personal manager or somebody who can fill that role might be the next person I would find, or find those relatively close in time. Your booking agent's going to come later. Your label people are going to come later because you're going to have somebody to assist you with that. Other members of your team, which most people don't really consider, if you're a songwriter particularly, there are organizations here in town that can be extremely fruitful. Nashville Songwriters Association, NSAI. I think the I stands for Incorporated, I'm not sure, but NSAI is a great organization. I've worked with them for years, ever since I've been here. And they do a good job with different programs, and it's good to be a member of that because you'll get to know people, you get to know other writers. May not be the top writers, but you may. I mean, and that's one way you can get out there without a lot of money and start meeting people. Your performance rights organization. Talk to BMI, talk to ASCAP. CSAC is invite only, but if you're a good enough writer, that's an option. But ASCAP and BMI have writer relations people. So you call them up and say, I want to join. Who's my writer relations person? Can I talk to them? And those people have a vested interest in hooking you up with publishers because they represent the publishers. So if you're a good songwriter, you can go play for the writer relations person and show them what you got. He might offer some suggestions. Go see Tom over here at Tom's Publishing, and so that's a good resource. Think outside the box when it comes to that. And then finally, what I would say, once you got those people kind of in mind or in place, then start thinking about what you want. Do you want the label deal? Is that the best thing for your career? It may not be. If you're an independent artist and you're doing fairly well on social media, you're making a little bit of money, you're doing some money touring, why would you want to give up 360? We all heard of the 360 deal. Why would you want to give that up and give them all that? And then you're going to be making a salary, basically, and giving all your intellectual property away. So there may be other alternatives. So you got to think about where you want to be in the music industry, where you want to be as an artist or a songwriter. And once you figure that out, then you just start figuring out where you want to be. If you want to be with Sony, start figuring out everybody you can find at Sony, start trying to meet them, send them emails, say, I'd like to buy you coffee, things like that. Nashville is that kind of town. There are a lot of ways. So when you're building your team, start out with a few key people. Because as I said, the lawyer, in my opinion, is probably your most critical component. And you're going to want to be able to stick with them for a long time, because if you plan on doing this for a long time, you want their advice.
Lightning round?
Lightning round.
All right.
Let's do it. So our lightning round, the point of it is just to have fun with it. It's not anything serious. We're going to ask you just a couple of questions, and don't think about it. Just like off the top of your head, first answer.
Grape soda.
That's right.
There you go. Yeah. So what is your plan in an event of a zombie apocalypse?
Probably run and hide.
Yeah.
Cool. That's what I would do, yeah.
Yep.
Unless I can find some sort of a nuclear weapon
Ooh.
to eliminate them. Does that work on zombies? I don't know.
I don't even know, yeah. What is one thing that you're just not very good at doing, that you're willing to admit?
One thing I'm not very good at doing. I'm sure there's dozens. I'm not very good at golf. I enjoy it, but I'm not very good at it.
What is one thing that you know is true, but a lot of people disagree with you on?
Oh my goodness. You're asking a lawyer this question? I can tell you a funny story, and I think this answers your question. I think I know that the earth is round, right? But I got a call 2 weeks ago from a guy from the Flat Earth Society who wanted me to help him draft some terms and conditions for a contest they're having to give $10,000 to anybody that could prove that the earth is round.
No way.
No way.
That's awesome.
Interesting.
That's crazy.
Sure, yeah. If you were to give a TED Talk on something that you're not known for, so not practicing law, not music, anything like that, what would it be?
Probably something like how science informs our spirituality. Because there's a lot in science that we think we know that can't explain certain things that happen. So, and there have been many books about this, but I would do something along those lines.
That's really cool.
Because that would combine my theology with my law and kind of.
That's cool.
And then we're going to go 3 more. These are probably going to go a little deeper.
Okay.
Potentially.
All right.
Potentially. But we're going to start with the past. What is one of the greatest lessons that your parents taught you?
I would have to say that would be my dad pointing out that I had a very logical mind. I say that in the context of the law school discussion we had earlier, because I think of anybody, he encouraged me the most to pursue that avenue as opposed to theology, that I would be a good lawyer. And my father wasn't a pollster, so he wouldn't have known that. It was just his general wisdom, seeing, you're a pretty smart guy and you can come up with some good solutions, so you should pursue that.
What is one of your accomplishments that you're most proud of?
I think writing the books would be just an accomplishment that I'm very proud of. There have been a number of legal victories that I'm very proud of. One example, when the internet was growing early on, when people didn't know what URLs were or what to do with them, I think I can say this: Garth Brooks' manager failed to renew garthbrooks.com, and it came due, and somebody snatched it up in Texas. So I had to go through the whole arbitration proceeding and guide him through that. So that was a major accomplishment in my career, and I've had a few significant victories since. So those would be on my list.
What are some projects that you're working on right now?
One project I think I've shared with you offline is the one involving Bo Carter. Bo Carter was a blues artist in the 20s. He had some 20s, 30s, and 40s, I think. He had some very interesting lyrics. If you look him up, some about fruit baskets and bananas, and I just won't go into the details, but you get the idea. But he had a song called Careen Carina. He wrote it ostensibly with another writer, but that's beside the point. Fast forward about 50 years, and Eric Clapton has obtained a recording of that at some point along the way, and this happened a lot in the blues. They had changed Careen Carina from Careen Carina to Alberta, Alberta. And Eric Clapton performs it on Unplugged and attributes it to Leadbelly. So an entirely different writer. Same song, same melody, same chords, everything's the same, except for some reason he attributes it to Leadbelly. Because Leadbelly does have a song called Alberta, which is a different song. So there could be some confusion there. So that's a project I'm working on now. We're in the middle of the lawsuit as we speak. So, and that one should hopefully settle out within a few months, I would hope.
And then what's next?
Well, I'm moving along at a pretty good clip right now, so some would say I'm living my dream. But in terms of next, I would like to eventually have a place in Florida because my wife has family there, and we'd like to have a place there that we could at least winter at. So that's probably next. I don't know if that's what you...
Cool. Any more book ideas that you have?
I've been toying with a few. My wife keeps telling me I need to write a book about Macon County, where Lafayette is. It's a little small rural community in Tennessee, northeast of here, near the Kentucky border. I've just got a lot of different stories from the families that I was a youth minister for and the families that I knew there, and just a lot of different characters. So I've been sort of trying to build a nonfiction book out of that. So that'll be next. And then I'm sure something will come up. Yeah, it always does.
Awesome. Where can people find out more about what you're up to? Where can they contact you to maybe ask you questions or anything?
Easiest way to get in touch with me is to go to my website, barryshrum.com, BARYSHRUM.com. You can get to my blog from there. You can find my call-in information. The number on that is man 24/7. So you can call me there, leave a message, and I'll get back to you fairly quickly. So That's the easiest way to contact me. Or you can email me at barry@shrum.com. That's easy enough too.
Well, thank you so much, Barry, for sitting down with us and chatting. It was wonderful. I learned a lot.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Hey everybody, just a few more things before you take off.
This episode was brought to you by our patrons. If you want to learn more about becoming part of the Patreon family and how you can unlock behind-the-scenes content, you can find us at www.patreon.com/Inside Music City.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can go to our Facebook page or our Instagram and let us know. Our page is facebook.com/Inside Music City or instagram.com/Inside Music City.
And finally, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone that you think would also enjoy listening to or learning from our conversation today.
Thanks everyone. You're awesome.